So, Comptroller Lierman, Dean Konana, thank you for joining us for this important conversation today. You guys issued a report back in September talking about the effects of federal cuts, the potential effects of federal cuts on Maryland's economy. For those of us who didn't see that report, can you give us some of the highlights?
Sure. First, thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here. Second, you're not all checking marylandcomptroller.gov regularly. Like, what? So we're really excited about the new research reports that we've been putting out since I started as comptroller, and we were really excited to partner in our first partnership with the Smith School of Business to put out a report on the impact that the federal government has on Maryland's economy. I think the high-level dollar takeaway is $150 billion. That is what flowed into Maryland from the federal government in 2024, so pre-Trump administration. Now that $150 billion is broken down in many ways, right? It's wages. We have, of course, over 230,000 federal employees who live in Maryland. It's retirement wages. It's also contracts. Federal contracting accounts for about 10% of Maryland's GDP. It is direct payments. Maryland gets fewer direct payments than some other states. That's like foster care payments and other payments. I think we're 37th or so in the nation. And then it's also grants, right? So think about all those categories. In most of those categories, we are now seeing retrenchment, cancellation, diminution. So, but we knew that in order to understand where we were going, we needed to know where we were to start. And so I think this is one of the first times, if not the first time, the state has actually looked at what money comes to Maryland from the federal government and what form does that money take. Now that in turn will allow us to start understanding our vulnerabilities. It also, by the way, I say this as a former federal litigator, it gives us standing in lawsuits. So we have Attorney General Anthony Brown has used that data when trying to get standing in certain lawsuits to show harm to the state. And it allows us to think about sort of what-if scenarios and to plan moving forward. So that's a quick synopsis. Anything I missed?
I think first of all, thank you for having us here. This is a great partnership. Thanks, Comptroller, for having us participate in that. The next step is to look at what the spending leads to, what the ripple effects are. Because every dollar the federal government spends, what is the ripple effect of that? Right now, the latest information, I don't think you have seen that yet. I just got a brief review of that. Because of the furloughs that are going on at this time, we expect, given the numbers, about 40 plus of them are furloughed. It's a weekly impact of close to $300 million. And so assuming that furlough ends up money coming back, we'll be fine. If it doesn't come back, then the comptroller has some issues to deal with. So it's about $300 million with both wages and the ripple effect of that.
And then so how have the average Marylanders already being impacted by this? The governor said earlier that we've already lost 15,000 federal jobs in Maryland. How is this playing out in Maryland already?
Sure. So how I think of what's happening in our federal government right now is both in a larger sense, like a true existential crisis for our nation, but also in Maryland, a deeply personal crisis. Because all of us, I would be shocked if somebody in this audience or in this room doesn't know somebody who either works for the federal government or contracts for the federal government or works at an organization that gets money from the federal government. And so, our economy has just been so deeply intertwined with the federal government for so many years that it is inevitable that any major retrenchment like the one that is happening now will have an effect. And the way that it is happening now, I would argue, is the worst way. Because certainly there is a thoughtful way to think about culling government services, right? And making government more efficient. And that has happened in the past. Unfortunately, now the way we're seeing it is a slash and burn effect. So people have no ability to plan. They are, grants and contracts are being cut that were already agreed to. And so that has both, I think, it certainly has a monetary and financial effect on families and communities. It also has a psychological effect. And, so we are all facing every day just increasing levels of uncertainty. I'd say the only thing certain about our economy and our revenues right now are that they are very uncertain. And that is a real challenge. I think I said in the March Board of Revenue Estimates hearing, like, there is no econometric model that will allow us to predict President Trump's behavior.
You summarized extremely well, very well. If you just look at what's going on, these cuts are supposed to happen over the next decades. I can't imagine the rate at which things are going on, with $37.6 trillion in national debt. Even in a good economy, GDP is growing, by the way. Yet, we're going to have a $2 trillion deficit, budget deficit. It is unsustainable. So cuts are going to happen. The question is, how is it going to happen? Is it like slash and burn, or is it going to be systematic retrenchment? What's happening today is, luckily I'm not in your role to manage that. It's tough to manage when you have this uncertainty. The only certain thing is the uncertainty. Yes.
I'll just add to that, too. I think the greatest irony here is that if the administration were really interested in helping to close the debt or the deficit, then they wouldn't pass bills like OBBBA, and they wouldn't defund the IRS, right? I mean, right now, what we're seeing during the shutdown is I think more than half of IRS staff are not working, which means we're bringing in even less money. And every state benefits from IRS audits. They have staff who can do complex audits that our staff are simply not capable of doing and do not have the resources to do. That then changes the AGI, the adjusted gross income, for companies and for individuals, and then we are able to sort of, from a trickle-down effect, benefit from that. And so every state is going to lose revenue, is going to not be receiving that revenue that they would have otherwise received if those audits and that complex work had continued at the IRS, but it's all being cut.
And do we know yet what that impact is?
We won't know. We receive, the last estimate I saw was sort of in an average year over the past few years, we saw about $500 million come in as a result of IRS audits. But we don't know which of that money would have come in anyways, because we would have caught it, or if that's solely completely only because of federal government audits.
So there's a lot of uncertainty. So we don't know when we're going to hit rock bottom.
No, we don't.
I mean, people got furloughed last week. They could lose their jobs. So what could rock bottom look like, and when do you think it could come?
That's a good question. I'd be curious if the dean has any thoughts on this. But we've been seeing about 2,500 layoffs a month for 5 of the past 6 months. OPM estimates that 300,000 federal workers will lose their jobs. A sixth of federal workers are in Maryland. So if we just go sort of ballparking, that's about 25,000 Marylanders. We're at 15,000 right now. So don't know, though, if that includes people who took that fork in the road deal. Remember that deal those folks were paid through the end of September. So our revenue estimates that we get monthly, or our revenues that we get reporting on monthly, we have not yet seen the effect of that. And we won't until October, November, when they stop being paid. So I don't think we do revenue estimates. For those of you who don't know, I know all of you know this, we do official revenue estimates March, September, and December. I know you all watch us on YouTube too. So our next revenue estimates will be in December and March. And I think those two estimates will give us a much better idea of what the impact of these cuts will mean on our revenues, both personal and sales tax.
Actually, this morning while driving, there was an announcement of, I believe, around 100,000 of them are taking retirements. So that's going to come in. When it's going to show up, we don't know. So this morning, so I don't have the exact number. it's happening.
And you talked about the vulnerabilities this has exposed in Maryland's economy. So do we wait too long to diversify? We're talking about diversifying now. Is this something we should have done a long time ago?
You know, that's a hard question to answer because you go to where your strengths are, right? And we've had a great relationship with the federal government over the past umpteen decades. You know, it would have been hard to predict that the federal government wouldn't want to fund cancer research anymore, right? So, you know, you can't, I don't necessarily fault us. On the other hand, I do think it is important that we move deliberately and quickly to diversify our economy, to rely more on the private sector than we have been. Also, federal government employment grew quite a bit during the pandemic and immediate post-pandemic era. And that actually we actually then saw too, private employers having a really hard time finding employees and a lower labor force participation rate even after the pandemic than prior to the pandemic. So now, you know, my hope is that folks who are RIFT or who voluntarily leave the federal government will be able to find jobs in the private sector, and that the private sector now will be able to start growing more easily because there will be available, well-skilled, employees who were not otherwise available to them. And I know Governor Moore was just here, and he has sort of his lighthouse industries that he's talked about, really focusing on so that we can build those industries in Maryland, which is important.
Yeah, this is a great question. I may have to repeat, those of you who heard Governor Moore, I might do a poor job explaining, he did it really well. If you look at what happened, Jet Propulsion Lab in Caltech just laid off 11% of their staff. One of the reasons the director said was they had to compete in this marketplace. Well, that's weird, because in the past, the government funded all this research. Now, you have SpaceX competing. You have Blue Origin coming in. You have private sectors coming into the space business very aggressively. So going back to what Comptroller just said, we have incredible talent here. And if Governor Moore, he used the word being aggressive, and I think he's extremely aggressive in courting new businesses. I think it's a time to bring this industry like SpaceX, Blue Origin, located here, because you have the talent here. And those of you from University of Maryland, if you heard me saying, as a business school dean, everything is a business. Governor Moore said he's the chief executive officer of the state. So if you just remove the state as a business, what do business do, a smart business would do at this time? One, they're going to be very aggressive reaching out to new customers. They will be passionate about retaining the existing one. The reason is, just like you're being competitive, your competitors are also aggressive in courting your businesses too, right, customers? You're going to invest heavily in R&D. You're going to build in entrepreneurship. You're going to train your staff and talent to the next generation. So replace that business with the state of Maryland, the businesses or the customers as employees, and see, we do exactly the same thing. So I had to give a lot of kudos to the leadership in the state. We've been aggressively courting NVIDIA. AstraZeneca has come in. They've gone to South Korea. They're going to Japan. They're going to Silicon Valley. This is about putting the state of Maryland in the what you call the consideration set in marketing term. If you're not in the consideration set, they will never even look at Maryland. So I think the state leadership has done extremely well in reaching out, and that's why Governor Moore said 100,000 new jobs have come in. These are high-paying jobs, not slow-paying jobs. So, yeah.
But these cuts are also happening very fast. They're coming at us really fast, and it takes a while to bring a business to town, to court a business, to move their headquarters. So we're going to be able to move that fast, or are there just going to be painful times until we get there?
You know, it's a good question. I will say one of the interesting things we've seen so far is that we haven't seen a market decrease in our revenues. So we know that we've had, thousands of employees be laid off by nonprofits who were cut because of USAID cuts, Catholic Relief Services and others. We've seen 15,100 federal government employees at least lose their jobs in Maryland. And yet we haven't seen a huge decrease in revenues from income taxes. And so this is a little bit of a mystery, but it means either that those folks are finding other jobs, they're not looking for other jobs, or other people are making more to supplement, or other people are moving into the workforce to supplement that lost revenue. So it's a little bit of a murky story right now. But, I read stories almost daily in social media and also in newspapers about federal employees who were laid off who are struggling to find new roles. So, or folks who worked in the international development space. Those are very hard jobs to replicate. And those people have amazing skills. And so they have to think about, what the next step is, which is so painful. And to do it in such an abrupt way really doubles down on, I think, the cruelty of all of it. But so I think it's a little bit TBD to your question. I don't know that there is one right answer for how quickly people will be able to find new jobs.
I think the state has done a marvelous job in actually putting quantum, the capital of quantum, a partnership with the University of Maryland. And I know President Pines will be here, who has been a big champion of that quantum. This IonQ, today's market cap of IonQ is just staggering. It's going to attract. Now, the question you asked about is, can you rapidly pivot away from? It's very hard. But one thing the state can do very well, and I think being in academia, I can openly say that, is how do you signal to the world that Maryland is open business? They are fast in approving any requests, approvals, clearances. How do you convey to the market that you are open to business? You come here, things will happen faster than any other state. And the reason why Virginia is able to pull a lot of these businesses, including some of the head offices, is because they're able to sell that. I think Maryland has to sell that we are open to the business, we are fast and furious in getting things done. And then all the ecosystem that has to be built around it, right? Good school districts, infrastructure, roads, all these are important in order to get the ecosystems pulled in. Everything takes time. But I think the state has done marvelously well in actually signaling these things. But you got to signal that we are doing, I have some data which is fresh out of the press. If you don't mind, if I can say that.
We have about 2 minutes left.
2 minutes. I'll
so
30 seconds then.
Before, yes.
So this is our faculty, Kislai Prasad, who is doing a survey based on all this chaos that's going on. And the response we gotten from the business, what are the top strengths? This is what the state should keep aggressively pushing it. Proximity to Washington, D.C. and federal establishments. Access to highly skilled and educated workforce. Strong regional and local customer base, strategic location along the East Coast. Okay, these are the 4 strong. But then you have to worry about the top disadvantages that the companies express, who are being quoted by other states. Tax structure, high business operating cost, rents and utilities, high housing cost, slow inefficient licensing and approval process. Those are the 4. If the state can actually address these disadvantages to be an advantage.
So in our last minute, before we turn to questions, why don't we do a quick answer. Where do you think diversification in business has worked in Maryland? Name an industry, name a company, and that we could model that after.
And biotech, right? We have an incredible biotech industry which both takes advantage of our proximity to FDA and NIH, but also has grown up, also takes advantage of our incredible higher ed resources, Hopkins, Maryland, and more, and then also is its own private industry, right? So I think that is long-time success story that is a great model.
Okay, and Dean?
Obviously, I want to add quantum. AI, and of course, life sciences. And the state has invested in this. It's just they're not talking. They're invested in quantum and with the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and with UMD, Institute of Health Computing. You have investment made by the state, huge investment in these things. These are strengths. That's our, in fact, it's the state's core competence.
Yeah, okay. Thank you all. And I think we're going to go to questions now.
Yep.
Tennyson?
How's it going? How's everybody doing today? All right, the energy's still up. My name is Tennyson Donye, and I'm also with the banner, and I'm going to be taking audience questions. Just as a reminder, you all were given a card, and it has a QR code on there, so if you want to ask the panelists questions, I'll be taking your questions from there. So we have time for one question, and this is for whoever would like to answer it. What's one area where Maryland may still be thinking too small about its economic independence?
Good question.
So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by economic independence, but I don't think we have incredible higher ed institutions. We do still have the federal government here, right? So we do need to make sure that when we are ramping up in whatever industry, that we're working sort of hand in glove with our educational institutions to make sure that the talent is there, and to ensure that, when there are opportunities to partner with the federal government, that exists as well. So I'm not sure if it's too small. I mean, I think also if you're looking at places where we need to do more to lower costs in Maryland, certainly continuing to think about our resources and our energy costs is really important. I think, there are so many ways. We could have a whole nother panel on the cost of living in Maryland. My agency is releasing a report on housing in a couple days, but I think really thinking through energy and our energy independence and doubling down on sustainable resources and building a more sustainable energy grid is also really essential, especially as we build more data centers and AI is needing more data. So I think we really have to think big about energy. And I think, the General Assembly and the governor know that, and they are, but that will be a place where really the sky's the limit in terms of the work that we have to do.
Yeah, I don't know whether thinking small, quantum life sciences are basically very research-focused, research-driven, high knowledge-intensive work. But Maryland is all not that, right? You have a whole, a large fraction, it's like a pyramid, right? You're targeting the top of the pyramid, hoping that will trickle down the jobs. One way to think is, how do you get the jobs for the bottom? Where they need to have options, the wages has to go up, then there has to be competition to attract that talent. They may not be quantum experts, right? That's where we had to think much more holistically. Yes, quantum, life sciences, yes, very high end, top of the pyramid, but how do you touch the bottom of the pyramid? And that's where maybe you had to think hard.
I think that's it's interesting. I think that's a really good example of, it's not necessarily an industry, it's the job focus, right? And you have to have companies when they're locating here, manufacturing businesses, other businesses, they need to have access to energy. They need to have access to a trained workforce, right? Their workforce needs to be able to afford jobs, to afford housing near where they live. So it's really creating those conditions for success no matter what the industry. So I totally agree. I think that's important. Can I offer one final thought? I don't know if there's just one final thought on something that we don't always call out, but has been a real strength in Maryland that I am worried about, and that is our diversity as a state. 17% of Maryland is foreign-born. Over 20% of our workforce is foreign-born. We are an aging population. Our immigrant neighbors are mostly younger as a whole, as an average. And I think these are also concerning times in terms of immigration policies at the federal level and what effect that will have on our higher ed institutions, on our consulting practices, on our hospitals, our healthcare industry, transportation and logistics. So that's another thing that we don't always call out individually, but is really concerning to me as somebody who looks at the numbers, and I think it's probably concerning to many business leaders around the state as well.
Thank you.
Amen. I mean, that's an issue that is not getting much attention. I think the whole country has to look at this immigration from a different lens.
All right, thank you so much. Can we give one more round of applause for our panelists?
Thank you.
And for Andrea as well.